Good morning, Tartaria Australia, Autodidactic. We've just been talking about our experience here in Melbourne of the last week when Cambell came down for the live event. And we thought maybe it would be fun just to do a big brain splat of all of the random thoughts that we had as we were walking through all these museums and cities and, you know, piecing together these contradictory storylines and putting into some sense in our minds on the Tartarian sort of like brain net. So what do you reckon, Cambell? Should we just
let's do it? Let's pour our minds out into the ether.
Yes. All right. Well, I think we should start on probably the last conversation we had of the day, which is when we went to look at the Chinese History Museum in Melbourne CBD, which has only been open to us as the great unvaxxed for a tiny little amount of time. So we were lucky to get in there.
Yeah. We made that live too, which is amazing. But yeah, it was pretty cool, wasn't it? I had a few interesting things in there. One thing that we've been seeing, Keller been pointing out all week to me is Melbourne is full of dragons. These dragons are everywhere. And of course, in the museum in Melbourne, they have the Chinese Dragon Parade. I think it's quite old. What did it say, from 1902 or something?
Yeah.
So apparently, it's very old, and then when they hold the dragons. And there was a story in there that it's quite strange that they were running these, and they had their dragon, and in 1950 or in the 50s, the dragon was getting a bit old, so they needed a new one. So they went back to China to get a new one built. And when they got there, they realized that no one in China knew how to build these dragons. Like, seriously. So what they did is they then went back to Australia, got all these photos and everything, and as much info as they could on it, and went back to China and taught the people in China how to build the dragon. Okay,
crazy.
So that's literally the story, guys. So that's got to beg the question: is, did the dragon come from China and go to Australia, or did it maybe go the other way?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting, Cambell, because one thing that is definitely very noticeable as you walk around and look at these old buildings here in Melbourne is the dragon appears everywhere, like, on the little like banister heads and up the corners of balconies and just under the awnings. They have a lot of faces. So there's a lot of we're assuming the Tartarian culture of faces, and alongside that just this constant dragon facades, and they're just little, but they're all everywhere. The dragon, the chained unicorn, and the dragon, and the dragon, and the dragon. So we were looking at that thinking how interesting that, because I think there was a newspaper article that there was 30 years since anyone in China had made one of these parade type dragons. And then Cambell actually said to me, he was like, I wonder if Melbourne is China. I wonder if Australia is China. I wonder if Australia has always been China. Like, is Australia actually China? And then as soon as we asked that question, we turned the corner, and then there was all this information. This is fascinating. And to recap, we didn't know this. Okay. So we've been told this story about the gold rush is the reason why Australia was taken from paddocks to these empire capital cities, like the gold rush. So first of all, what you need to know about the gold rush here in Australia is that the majority of people working those gold mines were Chinese immigrants, vastly outnumbered the Europeans working those gold mines. So the first question is why? Why and how did suddenly China know to basically invade en masse into Australia at this moment randomly and goes directly to these places where the gold was?
So many questions. How did they know where the gold was?
Yeah.
How did they, exist in this climate? Walking through the bush in Australia, how do they know where the food and water was? But it was so serious that the Victorian government literally that they put a tax on Chinese people coming into the state because they were worried that the Chinese were just going to take over the government because they were just outnumbering everyone. And so then the story is instead of coming into Melbourne, they then came into Adelaide and they walked
400 kilometers.
400 kilometers in a new country. You know, they don't know where the water is. They don't know what the food is. They don't even know what the plants look like, right? Like completely foreign land, apparently. But they all make it and they all flourish, right? And again, how did they know? You know, Australia's massive. So
Massive.
to walk out and just find gold is it's like it's the literal needle in a haystack. So
Totally.
the fact that
And survive.
you know, the fact that we don't have stories of like just these tragedies, you know, of people dying all over the place, you know, trying to find their gold and their fortune, but dying. I mean, I think that there's one that they tell, you know, Burke and Wills, right? But
Yeah.
they should be.
Oh, Burke and Wills.
But we don't hear about them. So this is the thing. And the other thing to put in there is we've all, you know, seen the research that says that the Chinese, which was a part of Tartaria at least some point, it was full of, well, and it's still full of white, you know, Caucasian redhead mummies, right? 7-footers. Genghis Khan was a 7-foot white dude. In China. So there's something going on with the population here. So is it possible maybe that the Chinese were already here and they were discovered and then they were exported out? Because another thing, and I'll just add it in here, we worked out that the only orphans and orphan trains that at least, and let us know if there's other ones, only Corkies, right? Only white people. Haven't seen any for Asians or for blacks or anything like that. You know, as far as orphan trains and the orphans, they all seem to be white. So lots of questions from Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, because that would promote the idea that were we invading China, is Australia China, were we invading that and not the other way around? The Chinese knew exactly how to negotiate this country, its harshness, its environment, its food, its water. They knew how to negotiate it. They thrived. There's a Chinatown in every capital city here in Australia. Like, why? But the orphan one's an interesting link, because if you look at all this talk about orphan trains, Campbell's right. There's no blacks, there's no Asians. It's just like Caucasian white kids. And so were they mass breeding the children to counteract, so they would like become the superior ruling, you know, like culture? And like, that's an interesting question. And it would be interesting to see if anyone has any evidence counteracting that.
Yeah, because it's the story we've been given, at least in the recent history, is it's white people, right, going into these countries on mass. And there's always an indigenous culture, right, that was prehistoric. How we know they weren't. So, you know, with that information, that would mean that at some point that those people were a flourishing civilization. Were, you know, this is the thing. So with the orphan trains spreading Caucasians around for whatever reason, into these new realms. And the other thing that we discovered is the Chinese started a lot of industries. Oh yeah,
hello, we didn't even know this.
The pearling industry in WA in the 1840s.
This is they established and founded these industries. They didn't come across them and just start doing. They founded them. The pearl industry, tobacco, bananas. What? Did you guys know that the Chinese were the ones that started the first banana plantations here in Australia?
Exactly. And an interesting thing with plantation bananas in Australia is they're always connected to railway tracks.
Yep. Oh, guess what I found out today, Campbell? One of the acts that was passed here in Melbourne, what was the date on that act? I was just researching it because it was like, what? In 1884, the Victorian government like announced a famous act that enabled the construction of 66 new railway lines, right? But guess what that act is called? The Octopus Act. The Octopus. What? So, of course, we didn't build any of these railway lines. They would have just been, you know, reconstituted from what?
What has that got to do with anything? The octopus?
I know, why the octopus? Of all the creatures and entities, all know our feelings about the octopus. There's something very dark and malevolent. What's the word? Benevolent, malevolent about the octopus. How it appears in presented to our culture. It's very dark with its squidgy little black goo that comes shooting out, and
of course it spreads its tentacles and it stays there, and so it's very interesting.
Just random, but also back to industry.
Yeah. What else? It was gold, and what else was it?
Tin industry.
Yes, in Tasmania, wasn't it?
Yeah. And Tasmania was famously inhospitable back then.
Famously, to the point where they had a penal colony for convicts down the south end, and convicts were trying to escape all the time, and none of them could make it anywhere because literally the bush was too thick.
And there was no food.
But the Chinese went through the bush into the middle of it and just found all the tin. And this is within within 10 years kind of thing, right? Of them being there. It's just
so that sets up an idea that the Chinese didn't just participate in these industries. They were the founders of the tin, the banana, the tobacco, the pearl, and of course the gold mining here in Australia. And that's probably just a few of them that we came across. So then we started talking about, we get sold this narrative that, the gold mining happened, and then they found this gold, which is really fucking heavy, and whatever, they found it, whatever, they bought it all back in handkerchiefs, whatever, all bullshit, but whatever. But then we were like, but hang on a minute, if the vast majority of gold diggers and gold operators back then were Chinese immigrants, then wouldn't that say, logically speaking, that the gold would then go back to China, not back to Europe? And if it went back to China, then it was very fair to say that if we actually did a lot of deep research here, maybe the majority of Australia's infrastructure, economics, industry, buildings, real estate was always owned by China. That China was the major investors in Australia right from the beginning, because potentially we were already China.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the British did, when they spread out. They mined stuff and all went back to England. They didn't give it to someone else. So this is the thing, and we haven't had a chance to look into it. But I'll look into it. How did they all get here?
Yeah.
Because China's not Europe. If they're coming on the boats that everyone else is on, they have to then get to Europe. But otherwise, then we're talking these big seafaring junks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be a massive story of them, but there's no story of anything like that.
No. We know the story about the tall ships. We get records of that, but we don't see epic.
Only from England or what's the other one? Amsterdam.
Yeah,
that's it.
There's no epic inventory about huge Chinese junks coming, huge imports of Chinese ships and boats carrying all these immigrants. It just is sort of it's just a background layer of our history that just gets put in there, but it makes no actual sense. So
it's hard to look at it. Yeah.
So and the other thing that was weird and just was, talking about resets and time loops, was that we didn't realize this, but back in the 1800s, there was all these comics that were appearing in the newspapers, and it was all geared about getting this yellow China virus out of the continent, and basically with all their vaccinations. And that's what the comics were about, the vaccinations brought in by China as a result of smallpox, which the cartoons were squarely aiming and blaming on China and Chinese back in the 1800s, and the forced vaccination of this smallpox.
Yeah, it was a very and it was at the time that they were putting these taxes on because they were trying to stop people coming in, right? But yeah, it was definitely to create division and to try and make the Chinese a lower class. But wouldn't they have been that this is the thing, right? But they should have been the smaller, lower sort of poorer class anyway, because there should have just been less of them, not as well equipped. They've come a further distance and all this. We're pretty sure the emperors weren't coming out to dig gold, right? And so there's this big
Cambell.
well, maybe they were taking the gold back.
what flying ships they had. Hello. Could you not fly a ship to Australia? Would that, if they landed in Perth and had to get to fucking Bendigo, would not Airbuses be a far more convenient way of traveling?
Airbus, indeed. And why are they called junks, right?
Yeah.
Because they just go around the world collecting junk.
Fucking, I mean, like, you know, and you look at this, so the other thing that was interesting about this museum to note was that you would think, like, if you're looking at a beginning colony here, every able-bodied person is out finding gold. Like, that's the sole mission of the whole colony and culture across Australia at the time, which would denote that there isn't much going on in the cities if all the able beings are out in the bush, like working their guts out to find these little nuggets and that whole process. Like, if you look at how that happened with the Chinese people coming in, you would assume that there'd be some level of racism going on, that they would be definitely segregated and separated in a way that would denote them to be different, taking our jobs, taking our gold, taking our resources, taking our women, whatever it was. You know, you see that mirrored throughout other cultures. But when we went into this museum, it didn't feel like that. Like, these Chinese people, the photographs and the newspaper clippings, they were like so integrated. There was Chinese baseball teams and Chinese
Aussie rules, man. They were playing Aussie rules and stuff back in 1900.
Yep.
And then there was a picture of the ladies, and they had like a band, but they were doing Chinese music with the Chinese lady.
Caucasian ladies doing Chinese music, and Caucasian people like doing Chinese theater and big Chinese festivals, and like and big Chinese and Caucasian sport teams. Like, they were integrated.
They were. The Dragon Parade was one of the biggest things since 1700 kind of time, and you know, everyone was out there enjoying it, right? They weren't out there yelling at these people. And you know, when I was growing up, you know, what I got taught about the gold fields is they do mention the Asians, but they just kind of mention them. They don't really tell you.
No.
But it's always that they were out there, and you know, no problem. Everyone loved them, right? Everyone was just working together. So they don't have this story of any, segregation or any, animosity between, different sort of, races. Not that race exists, but there was definitely an effort to bring that in by the government.
Yeah, I mean, it was really weird because, if you think about the history around that time period on a broader scale around the world, like China was a pretty unknown variable. Like it was like Japan and China, Asian countries weren't integrated into our version of the historical narrative. They weren't. Didn't really open their doors to the West for the longest time. There wasn't that integrate. They would have been seen as very exotic and very different. And of course, no one would have understood their language whatsoever. Their food, everything about them would have just been so strange and bizarre. But you don't see that represented in the evidence that's there in the 1800s. You see like almost the complete opposite to that, like total integration, total acceptance, like complete communication. Like it's just off. It feels off from the history we've been taught. Like this was going on for far longer, or we'd come into their realm, or the integration of China across the whole realm, across the whole world at that time was far greater, far more integrated than we've ever been taught.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of makes more sense is that there was a population, a smallish population of Chinese people in Australia when we landed. They happened, and because they were here, they knew where the gold was, they knew where the tin was, they knew where the pearls were.
Yep.
They knew the best places to grow banana and tobacco and all this kind of stuff. And they had some of the old infrastructure working, I think.
Yeah.
And then we've come in and basically, just moved in on top of them, because at that point, white men came in with guns and, more infrastructure, more people, and slowly took over. But that story kind of makes more sense, because this whole story of, the gold rush, apart from the fact that it happens, in Australia and in America in the exact same year. Hello.
Yeah.
When you look at and California as well, to a point.
Yeah.
They're so big.
Yeah.
How are you going to find the gold? The likelihood of 20 people, even just 20 people walking out and randomly finding gold is that's impossible pretty much. But when they're talking about hundreds and thousands of people just
Yeah.
randomly finding gold everywhere.
I mean, try it at home. Like I've lived in the bush for many years, and like, you know, like I know that gold is prevalent, and I know that it actually is so prevalent. It grows through some of the gum leaves veins, you know.
Exactly.
But like, you can't, like, unless you're fully psychic, tuned in and buzzing on the same frequency, you would struggle to just walk around, because it means you're just digging randomly everywhere. Like, you know, like, it's just it's like 1 in a billion chance sort of things, unless they weren't digging for gold, of course. They were actually just digging up the remains of buildings or civilizations that were already caked in gold. So the building materials already had gold all over them. Potentially part of the reset, something happened to those buildings, and they may have melted into these weird configurations that we call nuggets and got encased in stone. But they actually fundamentally didn't need to be digging in the dirt like with gold pans. That's all bullshit. They were just like walking around and just finding these, like, you know, half buried buildings and half destroyed city townships sort of thing, and taking the gold.
Yeah. Well, we've got the stories of Norumbega, which is pretty much Washington, and it said the city was covered in gold.
Yeah.
And we have, you know, so many stories of, you know, cities of gold, buildings being covered in gold. And then we look around and we've got all these fires, melted kind of things everywhere. Yeah. So you can imagine if they were covered in gold and that happened, well,
yeah,
you just melt into nuggets, right? And so as long as you knew where these buildings were, you knew where to dig around the edge of the building, right?
Exactly.
That's where the gold is.
I mean, gold liquefies when it's heated up to a certain level. Like, it's got to be hot, but it definitely liquefies, and then it just will find its easiest flow, the vein that is like the crack that it goes through, and that's where you get these gold veins and you get nuggets. And I think all of the archaeological science we've been taught about, things like what would that come under, like the study of stones and gold and land. What's that?
Geology.
Geology. All of that geological information is, you know, it's trumped by the fact that we know there was extraordinary cities and realms across this whole world, and that the remains of those realms actually contribute to most of our minerals, most of our heavy metals, most of our metals. Like, they're not just these random things that are occurring in nature, so to speak.
No, I mean, mining, right? It's like the Freemasonry, you know, you just find it, you go, it's mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Mine. Gold, mine, right?
Yep.
It's all in the spell.
And you know, Cambell, when I'm out in the bush, like, you know, wherever you go in rural Australia, like, the government has the right, and they do this. They come over with drones, and if they can see any sort of metals or anything like this, any resource that's of value, they come and claim it. And so if even it's your property, if they put a flag down and you find gold, you have to give it to them. But the rights of mining in Australia, it's so interesting. We always think, oh, they're just being greedy assholes. They're wanting all the resources. But imagine if the reason they like control that process is they are linking it to underground civilizations. Exactly. You know, they're marking the extent of the underground of Australia.
Yeah, because the metals are marking where the old buildings are.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if they put a thing on your land and say, well, if you find gold, it's ours, then you're never going to dig for it, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the thing. And I'm sure it's the same in most countries, but in Australia, I think it's 3 feet. I think when you buy land, I think you own 3 feet.
Yeah.
And so literally they can take your land and go, well, we own the land underneath, and
exactly,
we just through your 3 feet to get there.
Yep. You only own a certain amount of the airspace above you and 3 feet underneath you. What the fuck is that?
Oh, it's crazy. Buy this land off. Show me the contract with God, man. Come on.
You know, and the other thing, Cambell, like, if we cross-examine sort of the cultural patterns through our history, like, when a nation comes into another nation, an invading nation comes in, they find resources which they call colonization. Then what they do is so Africa, all the Eastern countries, Middle East, like, it's just everywhere, prevalent. All the 3D countries, basic 3D, all the poorer countries that we see as like this impoverished country, they are so rich in resources. So that's an inversion and flip of this reality.
Okay.
Like,
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so Africa, like, let's talk about Africa. Now one of the poorest nations in the world, and yet they are the most rich in gold and other natural resources. The invading colonizers come in, they extract all of the resources and they take it back to their nation. They don't stay and build up that nation. In fact, the African people, they can walk past streets full of shops full of gold, which they do, and other various gems and metals and beautiful things. And it doesn't stay in their country. They're the poorest people in the world. But in Melbourne, in Australia, the opposite magically happens.
Yeah. And what was it? 49 till 11 years, right? 11 years from discovering gold in Victoria to being the richest city in the world. 11 years.
This never happens. Like normally, if like an invading culture comes in, let's just say it could have been the Chinese, it could have been the Europeans, like whatever, whoever it fucking was, like normally you'd extract it or take it back, and that you wouldn't take it back, convert it into wealth and bring it back and present it to this, nothing nation. I guess it's a very weird.
Yeah, rich people have things like businesses and land holdings and all this stuff, and even if Australia was awesome, they're like, wow, we could, really get some good farms or whatever going. They would do that slowly. They wouldn't like dump everything into Australia, into this colony out, and but they don't know how to farm the soils or anything. And go, yeah, we just dump it. It would all go back to their family wealth, right? Mm-hmm. And then they would maybe bring a bit out. But the story of it, and it's the old question we've been throwing around, right? Is who are they buying stuff off? Mm-hmm. In 11 years, just because you've got a hunk of gold doesn't mean that you can buy bricks, right?
No.
If there's no bricks, because you need brick factory, glass, we need all the infrastructure to actually, for that gold to be worth much. You can't.
Yeah. Like if we changed the narrative, if we took out this narrative that the gold rush built Melbourne and replaced it with our reality of the truth, which is Melbourne was already here, Australia was already here. They didn't have to spend any money like building it. They just spent money like digging it out basically and then deconstructing it. Like, which is vastly different from actually building a whole city over and over again in various spots in Australia at exactly the same time. And so if we change that narrative and got it back to our narrative, then imagine what a different story it would be then if the resources,
you go.
Well, I was just going to say, imagine the difference in the historical data. Like we now are saying that gold didn't build Melbourne. That didn't happen. Melbourne was already built. That Chinese people were somehow already here because they were really like well versed to the landscape and all the industries, and they were already processing and made available. We'd like look at if we took away the notion of European architecture and then meld it with the Chinese architecture, which is where all this dragon symbology comes in, and Chinatown was already there, people. Was already there.
yeah, this is the thing. And from the perspective of Melbourne was found, so all the people who came in and started the industries, they didn't pay anything, right? They were given free buildings, free machinery, free land, right? So there was no debt, and they would have been backed by money. And then they had the gold rush, right, which was the rush for gold. Quick, rush out and find the buildings and rip off on what you can.
Yeah.
And so that created an economy they could use, of course. And then if there was, a civilization here, a population of Chinese, then they would have had resources, right? They knew where the tin was, they knew where the food was, all these different things. So then they could have grown quickly. Yeah. And that would have created a rich city, right? Because you suddenly got all the people, they've got no debt. There's no debt, but they've got all the infrastructure they need, all the land they need. They know where all the resources are. And now they're just stealing gold and bits and pieces so they can trade. And suddenly that trade happens and bang, I can see that would make a massive economy, right?
Exactly. And quickly.
But
of
the
course.
Other way wouldn't. If there's something to trade the gold for, it makes sense. When there's nothing to trade it for, the whole story falls over.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, it makes total sense. Like these environments were already built. you know, they didn't need resources to build them. Like, it was basically like, you know, clean them up, basically, dig them out, clean them up, you know, rejig a few things when it comes to sort of dismantling the technology and rebuilding the narrative of the history. But, you know, and like, we were at the National Library, we went to the National Library, and, you know, fucking hell, my God, what a building. Like, whoa, man, it's epic. And has nothing, it is not built as a library, no freaking way. It's more like built like a Congress. And you can really see that this civilization, or Melbourne, as right at the beginning, was so advanced and developed that it would have been so exciting for people to like immigrant over here and come into this culture and just move in, basically. And if all they have to do is move in, then everything can thrive because they've got so much time to thrive it.
Yeah.
They're not trying to survive.
Yeah, and the people that were here would have benefited as well, right? Because if they were sort of, you know, they, you know, didn't have all the tech running, right? They were living in a sort of mud-flooded world. So the new population would have brought new goods and services in, right? And then they would have been able to trade, and they would have been happy. And exactly, everyone gets a free house, right? And it's all, you know, that story works as far as a population growing quickly and everyone. And that's what we see, right? We don't see this animosity. We see this coming together and of cultures.
Celebration almost.
Yeah, it's like a celebration.
Yeah.
But like Kelly said, you know, if you take away the convict story and instead it's like, hey guys, you know, it's a bit, you know, a bit crowded here in England. Come to Australia, free house, free land, you know, because we're told, they tell us they were giving everyone free land. But of course, it was just to convicts.
Open door.
Right. But if we, you know, attribute that to the cities, which is, you know, and then you come in, you've got a free house, you know, it's probably furnished, it's probably got free electricity, and then you've got access to these different things and services, then, yeah, man, that's exciting. That's a good deal, right?
Yep. And it makes sense then that you see a city not surrounded by quarries and industry and ironworks and metalworks and glassworks and all these things that we would require to build what's behind us back then. And you've got all these pictures of electricity and trams. And actually, on a report I read just before, it was talking about how shocked some of the quotes that people were articulating back in the 1800s when they first arrived in Melbourne, was how shocked they were at how lit up Melbourne was, and that actually Melbourne was more lit up than London at the time. Melbourne was more advanced with power than Europe at the time. Fucking what? That makes no sense.
And what we found out is that they built Melbourne and then they went, hang on, we forgot to put the power into the sewage, right?
That's right, yes.
After the city was completely built, then apparently the gas and the electricity and the sewage and everything went in. What?
Which makes sense with the Tartarian timeline. So when we were looking at, I think we were at the Treasury Museum when we saw that. And it was like, we got blown away because, you know, in all of these museums, what they love to do is you're in this amazing building, like fully Tartarian, hardcore engineering, massive structure, massive columns, massive everything, all gorgeous. And then you go down to the quarters where people live or are sleeping, and you're presented with these like beds that are made out of sticks and rickety old furniture and chairs that are kind of handmade out of the bush materials and like never a fucking bathroom. No bathroom. There's like a tin bath, freestanding bath, and like a box for a toilet.
And so like bringing buckets of water in, but they're living in these massive, you know, bloody brick buildings with 15-foot high ceilings.
It's crazy. And so obvious when you start looking at it, which is why it's so important that you guys go and look with this consciousness go to your museums, go and see the contradiction in the narrative and see it for yourselves, because it makes no sense to be presented with beds made out of sticks, and not even really beds, just like these like poor person's like quarters in these feats of grand engineering, these extraordinary wealthy buildings, and yet they're presented with the population as sleeping like, you know, like the fucking
good point,
Cinderella.
They always do that with beds. Everyone was always sleeping in these really bad beds or on the floor. Like now we know how you feel when you have a bad night's sleep, right? Especially if you're on the ground and you sleep wrong and you wake up with a crook. But these people were sleeping like that, and then they were getting up with so much energy and vigor that they were just building these amazing cities, hunting for gold out in the bush. They didn't need water. They were like Superman, but they didn't have a night's sleep, right?
It's definitely was obvious, Cambell, as we walked around, that the contradiction between the engineering feats of these buildings, like these extraordinary buildings, compared to the lack of what one would require as a human to be living in them. So like, why would you build these houses and these buildings? And like, even if we're just talking about the National Library, where people are going to be in and out and interacting with the buildings, that didn't include toilets, didn't include plumbing, didn't include kitchens, didn't include like bedrooms as we know them. Like basically none of these buildings like include the basic things a human being would need to live in them. So why would that be missing?
Exactly. And not just to live, you know, if they were, like I said, libraries or parliaments, if there's a lot of people in there for extended periods, you need at least a toilet. At least, you know, a tap. I mean, they had fountains, I guess, but it was just the weirdest thing, seeing this massive, and we'll show the photo of this massive brick building and this rickety little tin like bath in the corner attached to nothing. No
plumbing. There's literally no plumbing. So, and we did see in that museum that there was this whole like debate going on within the population about how to deal with the sewage issue and the lack of plumbing. So you've got like this burgeoning culture, fully embellished in all ways, beautiful facades and banisters and columns and grand ballrooms and all this amazing stuff. But they haven't got their heads around what to do with all the shit. Like, I mean, I love that this is always their downfall. And you follow the shit or the money and everything collapses.
But the other ridiculous thing is, they have all these things, and then you walk outside and there's fountains everywhere. Everywhere.
Okay.
It's amazing. And I was reading, what was it? I was reading, I think it was Hobart. I can't remember. It was a World's Fair, and then literally then they're like, oh, and we just sold all the fountains. What? Sorry, but if you sell a fountain, unless you sell it with the plumbing, that's called a statue. Right? Like what the hell? And you just see these dumb narratives everywhere. And of course, you go and look at these fountains that were, you know, bought and moved, and they're fully functioning fountains.
Yes, I know.
What the hell? You know, do people not realize there's plumbing involved here? And so, apart from the fact that they couldn't plumb, you know, water, showers, or sewage into the buildings, they could plumb the whole city out with fountains with the pressure to shoot up like 20, 30 foot.
How the contradictions, man. So, all right. So that brings us back to the waters, the living waters, because Cambell and I had a whole new theory about the waters. And we introduced it on a podcast just before the live event, that space is the ocean. Now, if we ran this thought process through our like time in Melbourne, and we just kept looking at how the society has always been built in and around water. And when we were at the National Treasury building, we went down to what they call the vaults, where they were holding the gold. But actually, it was so fucking obvious to us that we were walking through aqueducts. Hey, like the amount of underground aqueducts and water holding process and tunnels and all of it to do with water. And then we were looking at the dragon stuff. And like we were thinking, okay, you know, everything's inverted. We're always told and sold this story of fire-breathing dragons that covet the gold, that stand on the golden jewels and protect the golden jewels and breathe fire. But actually, when we started to look at dragons through the truth of dragons, we discovered that they actually are water. They've originated from water. They are water dragons. Exactly. These dragons, that's right. They
wings.
Yep.
And they breathe steam.
That's right. They breathe steam through their, not fire. And they can influence the weather. They bring the rains. They bring the clouds. They bring the water. So if we've got a culture of the Tartarian culture that's integrated with the dragon, it makes total sense. Now, we always integrate the dragon with China, but let's just remove China for a second and say the dragon was part of the Tartarian culture, metaphorically enamored by the Chinese and Asia as a whole, but the dragon. So we look at then a city like Melbourne with all its water ducts and everything that goes on underground, and we can ask the question, within the Tartarian culture, did those living waters, all those fountains, aqueducts, canals, water systems integrate with the reality behind a living underground water dragons culture? That these water dragons were real and they were part of the process of the culture, the people, and the living waters, Cambell.
Yeah, and they could be real as far as real. They could be real as far as energetic or whatever. They could be energy moving through the waters. But we definitely see all the buildings, and this is what's sort of coming to light now, is they're all built on these massive, systems, water holding, water tanks, basically.
Yeah.
We know about the star forts. We know about the canals, that all this water was moving around everywhere. And of course, we brought forth the space above the heavens.
Yeah.
Water, right? And of course, what else are we told is held up in the heavens is the Akashic records and all the information. And we know water holds information. We know this. And then another thing that we sort of realized when we were walking around is that Tartarian buildings, the old world buildings, hold information.
Oh, that's right.
The new buildings are black boxes, and you look at them and go, okay, I've taken as much as information as that's got. You look at an old world building and an hour later you're still looking at it going, there's more information in there. So these buildings have literally got information encoded in them as well. And so, and we'll talk about that, but as a side bit, is that the water as well? They're holding the water up, so it's one big information process.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like the true Akashic record. So if we look at water, it is the most, water is the one substance in our realm that we know is influenced by consciousness. Like, we know that you can change the intent of water by focusing or writing a word on it, by focusing your vibe on it. You can actually make it all fucked up and polluted, or all gorgeous and symbolic and geometrically balanced. It can heal you or it can poison you. It can become whatever the dominant intention is. And I know, because I was always so obsessed with documentaries, that I followed through my lifetime the way documentaries have presented information. And way before the truth movement was at this level of full force, and all the GMO, genetically modified food and all that stuff came out, they'd fluorinated the water. So the first two things that were so strong when you were looking at what the fuck is our reality, has it gone wrong, was fluoride in the water and chemtrails. Again, steam, these particles into the air, which would affect the water and the clouds. They have intentionally, for the longest time, certainly our whole lifetime, made the biggest effort to corrupt the information in the water. And if we are 70% water and we need water to survive and drink and grow food, and most of our illnesses are a result of chronic dehydration, which is deliberate and by design, because all of our food is designed to intensify dehydration, not the opposite, not hydration, and all of our food and plants are grown with this corrupt information in the water, then what we're looking at here is a complete assault of the living waters that we require to live. And more so, if you look at what is God, grand organized design, what is source, God, is source or God represented as a component, potentially one we don't know about yet, of water. Makes so much sense, Cambell. I'm totally into this theory.
It does. There's just so many, the work of Dr. Emoto, his work definitely puts a lot of credence to it. We know that we can affect this stuff. We know that they can literally hold information in water, and of course water freezes into crystals, right? And then we got the whole crystal thing. We know they can encode into crystals. So literally water you could look at as flowing crystals, right? Moving crystals. So it's moving the information around. It's holding energy. It's holding information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing, you know, we talk about the dumbing down, right? And that's a big part of it is the food, right? Because of all the what's in the water and all this stuff. Imagine if we were drinking water that was encoded with information.
Of water dragons.
Of the ancients, right? Going back through these ancient buildings and grabbing that information and integrating it, and then we could literally drink that, you know, drink. And I mean, don't they talk about that as well, about drink up the information?
Yeah.
You know, there's a link there too between information and water, like drink it in, you know. So exactly right.
Oh, and it's so obvious when you talk about it like this, you know. I've always been like, it's always been a point of confusion for me to imagine that there's water above us, that the firmament is holding water above us, that we sit in water above us and water below us. But with this idea that we're actually like, that the ocean is space, and that the connection between us and popping through that ocean, which is very underexplored, and then up through out of the firmament, then you're in a version of water. Now, that version of water may not be like fucking mist, water and ice. It could, if water is able to hold any intention, it means it's pure possibility, pure potential in all directions. If your consciousness is clear and strong, you can impact the water. And the Jesus walking on water, that story that runs through the Bible, if Jesus' consciousness was a certain level, he could easily have enabled that water to hold him. Easily. We see all the superheroes flying around, levitation in the sky. Easily the water in the atmosphere could do that for them if their intention was able to maintain it. Like, it makes so much sense that source is a component of water, the life-giving elements of water. That's how we look at it, the living waters.
And the sign of Jesus is a fish.
A fish.
And, you know, obviously the walking on water, could that also mean maybe, you know, he was in heaven, right? In the waters, he was above the waters, or it could be a reference to information that he, you know, he was knowledgeable, wise, you know, all these things, right? And it could mean all of those things as well, because you know, the Bible is multi sort of encoded. But you know, even the Jesus story is very linked to water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the catching of the fish and feeding and all this kind of stuff. So
no, it's flood or water.
You know, so it's everywhere, and it's in so many stories, you know. And then of course, you know, we have the dragons, and we have you know, the Dogon, right? And the Dagon. The Dogon are a tribe from North Africa, and they're gods, or the people they worship are the Dagon, who are these half fish dudes. They're the dudes you see with the fish tails and the beards. And then of course we've got the mermaids and mermen, you know, and Phoenicians, the
Pope with his fish head and all that stuff. Like everything, if you take any alien concept, usually they're scales, usually they're scaly and reptilian and, you know, a bit like gilly. You take all of these like cultural metaphors throughout history, it always goes back to men and women as fish in some thing. Even Darwin's bullshit story that we originated as amoebas that came out of the ocean to the fish, the monkeys, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? This connection with water is fascinating. So in the Tartarian culture, like just walking around Melbourne, it's really fucking obvious that these buildings did not, they weren't designed to feed people and to deal with plumbing. You know, what they were, they did harness of everywhere with fountains and water sources. So like, and then you look at the ether, and what is the ether that generates all this power? Is it, if it is not, it is just the same, I would say, as an atmospheric water version, that whatever brings this power, this connection to power. And, you know, I was thinking about the other day, like, it's not like you have to go and turn on a switch with this sort of, with the sort of ether, electricity or power. You literally just have to go near it, and something about your body, like, actually just turns, like turns the light on. Like it's the walking between your
fields integrating.
Yes, it's the fields integrating, exactly. And all they seem to need at this time in this culture was to be able to access and drink this water, this living water.
Yeah, right. So did that access sort of Wi-Fi them into So you walk down the street, and as you do, the light turns on when you get near it, kind of thing.
Exactly. That's exactly how I think it worked.
And just as a side note, all of alchemy is based on water.
Yeah.
All their experiments, it's all, you know, like ionization and electrolysis and all this. It's all water.
It's all water.
Everything's water. So
yep.
Water's information. I was just thinking, right, this could be a stretch, but, you know, the water, you get the W, turn on its side and move it, and it becomes an E, right?
Yeah.
AETHER.
Yep. That's not a stretch at all, Cambell. That's great. Yes, ether, exactly. Just to move one letter.
And they love to do that, right?
They do love to do that. Yep.
So, yeah, this is the thing, and you know, they always leave the clues in the spell. I reckon that, you know, if you look at the words, there's always something there.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
you know what nugget means? I'm sure there's something in nugget. What is a nugget?
So obviously, like, Australia is an interesting continent because obviously every capital city donates these amazing civilization was all over Australia. This was a big part of the realm. We've got the story of the original law keepers, the law holders, the natives of this land with the indigenous.
Yeah, we haven't yet, if you're going to ask that question, but we will.
And then, of course, we've got this whole brand new narrative and story that Australia is the land of drought, desertification, like deserts, vast levels of desert, hardly any livable spaces, that Australia is hot and dry, that Australia is in lack of water, in lack of the living waters, that everyone is chronically dehydrated at some level here in Australia. And we absolutely fucking are, man. And so it's just an interesting inversion in the way that one would perceive Australia then as being this dry, hot water, country that always goes through drought.
Another thing, right? With all these deserts that we now know, you know, they're all man-made. When they do that, they're extracting all the water out, right? They're taking all the information away from that area.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, I tie this back into the Region 8 stuff, which is all very cool and everything that's come up, and it's like, fix the soil so it can hold water. That's the whole, if you want to sum up Region 8, fix the soil so we can hold the fucking water. But, you know, like, what?
Which literally then it gives to the plants. The plant has more information, it grows better. Like, literally, this is what's going on. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. So Australia is like, it's fascinating. All right. So that was our walk through the Chinese museum and paralleling it with the narrative we've got on sort of the Caucasian history of Australia. And we're walking around the buildings and we're looking at the dragon motifs and we're noticing the absence of, you know, humanness stuff in these buildings and the grand scale of them. Oh my God. Remember that one at 333 Collins Street? It's so freaking big, Cambell. It's so tall with the dome on top.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, this is so big. We went in and there was like this massive ballroom type entrance. All these buildings everywhere we went, they're so big, so intricate, everywhere, all over Melbourne. And like when we come to Brisbane, we're going to be doing exactly the same thing. And Sydney's going to blow our fucking minds. But we are building an alternative narrative here that's getting more and more and more and more concrete. And what I love about this journey, Cambell, is, you know, we don't have to be like smart. Like we don't have to do much. Well, yeah, we are smart, sure, but we don't have to be like super genius level at this point, because now that we've got this far, like we just have to go into the museums and everything is just click, building this picture for us. And you guys will have exactly the same experience once you like go and physically ground it and go exploring and be tourists in your fucking city, man. It's so much fun. Because you're going to get to see, and it's just like a whole new version just clicks and it's obvious and click and obvious, wasn't it? It's not like we have to search for it anymore. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. When you just, you know, and it's not let your imagination, you know, it is imagination, but when you let it flow and you don't hold it back, then things just come in, right? And this is what autodidactic is, right? You don't judge things as right or wrong. As soon as you see something and you're like, that's right or that's wrong, you can never learn from that again. When you go, it's interesting, and then, oh, that's interesting. And then after a while, you've got all this interesting stuff in your brain, and it starts clicking up.
Yeah.
Oh, and you'll see something and it'll go ding, 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 and it'll be picked up to 4 other things. And then you're like, now I've got an idea, and that starts to make sense.
Yeah.
This is how we learn. So, and of course, this is, what we do on this show is we're into, the bigger ideas and into using imagination to push forward to find the answers. And then you put that out there, and then you get confirmation.
Yeah.
Right? You get confirmation of, are we right or are we wrong?
Yeah.
And, so obviously we're not, we're not the looking at buildings and what's it made from and look at this crap. We're not that Tartaria channel, right? We're the Tartaria consciousness channel. We're it's like I said, with the wealth consciousness, we've got to be able to imagine the ultimate, expression of life, of earth, of the realm, to be able to live in it, right? And you don't get there without your imagination, right?
100%.
It's the best in the world.
And if we look at what we're talking about with water, and that we are from and immersed in water at 24/7, like we think we're breathing air that's not water, but actually at its finest details, it's water. Like we're breathing it all the time. It's not like we don't imagine ourselves being able to breathe underwater, but actually we live and breathe water 24/7. That is oxygen. And, like we're still living it. And I guess we're a unique biology that we can stand here living at such a, like being able to breathe and thrive with such little amount of water. But here we are on the surface, which is so interesting, Cambell, because all of this culture, we showed the air buses, we showed the air vehicles. And I know you were blown away with Melbourne because you saw the height of all these Tartarian buildings, and like how, which all look like at the top with their towers, all look like lighthouses. And it's like, like lighthouses to guide in, airships or air buses and air boats and whatever. But we can say that this whole culture is actually connected by underground aqueducts and underground canals and underground water systems that we haven't explored. The underwater travel that was going on at the time of this culture. Like if underwater travel was going on, there's lakes and fountains and rivers and aqueducts people could pop up in all over the place, all over the realm. And especially if they were using water in a different chemical process, like with a different intention, so a different weight to it, or a different, you've seen those underwater lakes, underwater water fountains, crazy stuff.
So they're like denser water, like that's denser again. And we know there's rivers under the oceans, like literal rivers in the oceans and stuff. So, if you know where they are, you just jump in a river and you get a free ride to wherever that river's going.
Exactly.
Right? Like on the top. So, and us being, up here in water, the whole thing about airships, right, and about flight, because there's this big question with planes, right? Where's the fuel go?
Yeah.
In the wings, really?
Yeah.
And they don't fall off. How's that work? So we've got to rethink, what is flight? Are they somehow, are they floating?
Yeah.
Not fighting, but floating, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Somehow, like because they know how to use it, or they're somehow using the dispersion of the waters, right, in the atmosphere. So, this is the thing, is that why they got rid of the airships? Because they couldn't explain to us how they were working or something.
Yep. I mean, how many of those sorts of decisions got made? Like they just got rid of the whole thing because they couldn't find a bullshit explanation to justify it to us. The giant bells.
No money to be made, or it was too enhancing to our quality of life, and they couldn't make money, so it goes, right? The bells, the free energy, the towers, the airships, the trams that were in most cities, still in Melbourne, but they were everywhere. All this stuff, and as they do it, of course, we know that one of the first things they do is they plug up the canals, right, and they stop the water flowing. They do.
They block the water everywhere.
And then they dump all the crap into the waters below, right?
Filling our sewage.
And
now all the medicines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that used to be full of intentioned fractalized water with good energy, and now
all the fertilizers and chemicals all into the water. There's no protection of the water.
The ocean, all the masks, a billion masks from all those good wearing people
I kind of look at the shape of the earth in my head right now. It actually reminds me of an eyeball. So if you take like an eye and put it on its side, you've got this like watery dome, which is our eye pupil. Then you've got this like thing in the middle, and then this like the iris, I think, you know, that all those like, which looks like the shelf, the Arctic shelf. And then you've got the rest of it, which is another circle underneath. And it's like this big thing that connects it to the brain. Well, I don't know the words. I'm sorry. The optic nerve. So I can now imagine like that top bit being us here, in under the dome and on the above in the heavens, on the ground, on the land. And then that you got this like and we see, and I mentioned this at the live, I don't know if I talked about it in the podcast, where we were talking about the rocket ships and how they always project, and that we're told they're projecting out and up, but actually the only evidence we see is they go up to come down. And we wondered if them going up and doing this was to get the force to go deep down, not up, which explains so much more. And of course, the astronaut suit is looking like diving suits. But if we look at like that, then we go to this optic nerve channel, which we could think of as like a channel out through that. The quality is not the word. The makeup of the water, the makeup of source is changing from the ocean levels. The deeper you get, it changes through this optic nerve, literally, and then pop out through into source above the firmament. And so we've got all these planets, realms, I couldn't call them planets, realms, like giant eyeballs floating in source with these optic nerves that connect them to the broader source.
The eye in the sky.
And it's literally the eye in the sky, literally the lens that we project all reality through, literally. So like and then I sort of imagine like all these floating eyeballs with optical nerves, and that's sort of like how we perceive in these broader realms, and why the observer is so important in all of this. And
I mean, and that's eyeball art's a thing.
It's a thing. Fuck yeah.
You know, I often think of it like an egg, you know, which is like kind of the same kind of concept. You know, it's like got the yellow yolk in the middle, and then but that's floating in the other whatever. And then you've got this shell, but you can, you know, go sort of maybe from one to the other, and then of course, you know, we come from an egg, you know, come from our mother's waters and womb and all this. So that's the thing. I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. It's definitely not the realm that they told us. It's something much more. And I think this water thing, you know, Martin Leakey's been saying it for years that we're living in water. It's just a much, you know, thinner version. Like you said, the lake underwater is much thicker, you know, so obviously they need the power to penetrate to get through it. So waters above, waters below, it's all through the old writings, right?
Maritime law.
God had to build a firmament to separate the waters above from the waters below.
In the shape of a giant eyeball. And that, like, hello, you are the observers that create reality. It's your perception that makes all this. So if a hijacking race wants to come in, all they're going to focus on is your projection and getting mass projection of a reality. That's their whole focus, because then that changes the water, and therefore the information, and therefore what we're perceiving and experiencing. And wow, man, like, you know, like,
this is where this is going, right? This is how we create it. So with the waters is the information, and it's what we program into that is what we experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think we'll do an episode next where we look at, you know, or if you go through all the mythology and fairy tales, you know, so many of them, it originates from things coming up from lakes, things coming up from water sources, from rivers, from oceans. Everything's always coming up, and then things going back through, like back down that way. It seems to be that those bodies of water are the gateway. It's all like the entrance in and out of the realm is coming through bodies of water, not through fucking space, but through bodies of water.
Indeed. You know, and then the whole water as a mirror kind of thing, and entities are always, you know, attached to that kind of thing. So we'll definitely get into that. You know, is that how entities get in here? They just know how to get through the waters, right? And of course, then they tell us, and they keep us on the land. And it's like, you know, the 3 foot, right? They keep us in the first.
Yeah, they do.
few meters of the
Yep.
water, and then we never discover that down there's actual gateways that we can, you know, leave this realm, get into the ethers, get into the waters above, and who knows what's out there, right?
And plus, we've now got a culture that finds the water really terrifying. Like we've really been traumatized by the notion of water. We've got trauma there, and sharks and jaws and all the Hollywood movies, and just the darkness of it and the underexplored nature of it. Like it never feels like a safe passage. It always feels like we've now been programmed to stay like sheep on the land, because the idea of being in that water is actually kind of terrifying for us, petrifying almost, probably scarier than what most people would find space.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there's a lot, right, of all these movies, and they're like, you know, way under the ocean in a submarine, right? And
yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's pretty scary, right? Like that's one of the scariest things, because you're trapped, right? You can't get out, you know. Especially with the story we're told, right? They tell us the only way out is up. Maybe if you knew to go down, you'd get out. But yeah, there's so much fear based around that, you know, programmed.
Yeah.
Right.
And they make submarines so fucking inhospitable. Like, but if you remember, like the stories like of Jules Verne and 40,000, whatever what was it called? Under the Sea. Yeah, like I remember watching that as a kid. In the movie, the submarine, the ship that he was in, was gorgeous.
Thing ever.
It was like a Tartarian submarine. Yeah. It was so beautiful.
Like fish-looking thing, wasn't it?
Yep. And it was so fucking cool. Like, as if you wouldn't, like, that would have taken away all of the, you know, perceived programming trauma of being in the water, underwater, which we get from these, you know, basically military submarines that seem like this long tube of inhospitable awfulness, you know. But like those Jules Verne movies, gorgeous, beautiful versions of underwater travel.
Yeah, and where are all the you know, the submersible machines, like fun machines? I mean, they have been invented, but you know, of course, you know, they sell them for like $1 million, so no one get access to them.
Yeah.
How do you get access to even become a submarine pilot?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I thought you had to be in the Navy, but now recently we found out that, hang on, civilians have got these licenses. But I remember there was this guy, and he invented this. It was literally, it looked like it, and it was based on the dolphin, and like you got in there in the water, and he like invented this game and like races and all these things with these machines, and they could jump and dive and everything. But of course, you know, never got off the ground, right?
Yep.
So there's they don't want us in there. They're not giving us the accessibility, right? And even if you're on top of the water, you know, it's only so far you can go, because, you know, if the story they tell us that Antarctica is frozen water, that's information. That's frozen information. Do they actually want us to not get in proximity to it, because we might start downloading stuff?
Absolutely. And I think that's why the dolphins and the whales, like I've always heard that the dolphins I've always understood that dolphins and whales are a form of another consciousness, that they are actually a dominant consciousness here in the realm. And if humans were gone, the dominant consciousness of the realm would be left up to dolphins, whales, elephants. There was fungi. There was one more. But the dolphin, like, you know, you hear so many stories of people who have gone and swum with dolphins and made contact with dolphins, and how blissed out and telepathic, and, you know, how interactive they are with humans. The dolphin realm seems to hold one of our original telepathic grids here on the realm, like really powerfully. And when I really got into holographic reality, it was at the hands of dolphins.
Yeah, we've got Monkey Maya in WA, where the dolphins come in and they literally take sick children there. And they've had these miraculous healings, just coming into proximity with the dolphin. And the dolphins know. They'll take a sick kid in, and all the dolphins will come up around the kid, but be really gentle and stuff like. So, you know, we know this, right? So the water, you know, so literally they could be, you know, the defenders of the waters, of the realm, of the information.
They are our brother and sister, and definitely there's definitely a full-on heart connection with dolphins and whales, full-on.
And of course, you know, that they've been attacked too. There was whaling industry literally almost wiped out all the whales.
It's so unbelievably brutal, so ghastly.
It's just, exactly. It was very, very brutal. And so people could make candles. I mean, come on.
crazy. Mass genocide. And you look at also like the SeaWorld kind of parks where they trap and experiment and do all these things with dolphins and sea creatures.
Whales and dolphins, killer whales, they put them in a pool for their life. I mean, it's horrendous.
It's a prison.
So, and when they do that, right, then when we come in contact with them, they're not the actual, they're not the full expression of what they should be. So we don't really get that wonder. We don't get that energy transference and all this kind of stuff because they're a caged, animal, right?
Well, I do think probably like in our time to come here in Tartaria, Australia, we will potentially
swim with dolphins.
Yeah, I think we'll do a special episode somewhere where we go, and probably JC would love this too, where we actually go and find a location in Australia where we actually can go and swim with dolphins and take our consciousness, all of what we've learned, into the water with the dolphins and see what actually happens. I think.
Yeah, okay. That would be just stand there and see. Yeah. What happens. Wow, cool.
Yeah, that would be cool, right? That would be compelling, interesting experiment, because that's what this all is about. It's about us trying these things out and grounding these stories and seeing, what theories are working. And on that note, just as we wrap up, Cambell did say to me, and I remember this because I thought, oh, yep, that fits with my theory. We're walking along and you randomly said to me that, maybe all the vanilla skies in all these pictures are a result of two suns. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That's a cool idea. Right or wrong, that's a cool idea that we've got these washed out skylines with nothing in the skies. Could that be because there was two suns in the sky? Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I thought it was cool.
Yeah. So many ideas. And we're definitely, going to be trying to get out on the road a lot more, boots on the ground, all that stuff. So don't forget, Brisbane, if you're up there, 24th of September, we will roll into town. 2-day event this time. We're going to, be a bit more organised. It will be amazing. So if you're in the region, get ready. And then Sydney, Perth, Hobart, Adelaide, everywhere.
Who knows where the pendulum will send us? Woo! It could send us to fucking Tamworth, for example.
Right? Could be the US of A. We don't know.
We don't know. So, all right. Well, look, hopefully by the end of this week, we will have the tickets available online for the Brisbane show. I would recommend you get in there early. We were blown away. They sold out so quick. We couldn't believe it. It sold out so quickly. So if you want to come and have the best day and night with your family and your tribe, and where you can pull to the fully max expansion part of your brain, you're going to fucking love it. So hopefully by the end of the week, they'll be up on the website. If they are, Cambell will leave a link below. If they're not, it'll be on the next show. And also we will have the download of the Melbourne live event also for sale on the website. It's $11.11. With the pendulum has spoken. and that way, if you're interested in watching the Melbourne event and getting a sense of the energy that was generated by the download, and also out of interest, just to have that download, you could put it on in the morning, one weekend, have a few friends over and just have it going on in the background, because it was really, really fun with lots of music and lots of dancing and all that stuff. And get to follow the conversation through these live events, It's kind of like a chapter in a book, I guess.
Yeah, man, yeah. And it's going to be like it's going to be probably 10 hours or something of footage, because we've got a bit of the walk we're going to put in there as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'll be available soon. I think I was going to say something, but I forgot what it was.
That's fair, Cambell.
Guys, right? It's information. I think I'm dehydrated.
Same, actually. I need a drink. The living waters. So, this also introduces us to the new life elixir that Cambell and I are into, which we'll be introducing soon. And there's so many cool stuff going on with water right now. So we really is in alignment with this new emerging consciousness. So I'm excited to keep exploring this topic. But Cambell, I reckon we'll wrap this one up for today. What do you think?
Bit of a brain mind drop this one. Lots of topics, but we just thought we'd get it out before we forgot, and we'll explore these all in greater depth in the future.
Yeah.
So please share this around, guys. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Of course, you'll find you'll find Kelly's channel as well and her Facebook group below. So go and subscribe to both. And Kelly's going to start putting out more videos. So we need to build up her subscription. So do make sure you go across and give her a subscribe and share this content around, guys. You know, if you think it'll help other people, let's get out there and raise the vibration and use the waters, right?
All right. Much love, everyone. Have the best week ever, best night, best day. And we will see you next time on Tartaria Australia.
You are.